At first glance, it looked like an ordinary Victorian family portrait. Crisp collars, calm smiles, and polished shoes. But when Dr. Sarah Chen examined the 1902 glass photograph under her microscope, something stopped her cold. One hand, pale, wax-like, unnaturally stiff, didn't match any person in the image. Its shadow didn't fall right. Its veins were too defined. And when she checked the negatives, the hand was still there. But the woman it belonged to never existed. What Dr. Chen discovered next would shatter Boston's most celebrated family legacy and reveal a truth buried for over 100 years. March 2024. Boston was waking up to another gray morning when a sealed wooden crate arrived at Whitmore & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious auction houses. Inside were dozens of photographs, each preserved in glass and dust, relics from the Ashford Hamilton estate, a name whispered with both reverence and curiosity in Boston's upper circles. The photographs belonged to Margaret Ashford Hamilton, the final descendant of a banking family whose roots stretched back to the early 1800s. For decades, their wealth shaped Boston's skyline. Banks, libraries, and even a university wing bore their name. But with Margaret's quiet death in her Beacon Hill mansion, her possessions had become history's property. That's where Dr. Sarah Chen came in, a Harvard-trained historian and one of the country's foremost experts in 19th century photographic authentication. Sarah was often called to separate fact from forgery. She'd spent years studying daguerreotypes, wet collodion glass plates, and gelatin dry prints, uncovering truths that time tried to erase. Nothing surprised her anymore, until that day. The crate was opened in the examination room. Sterile white lights overhead, the faint smell of old wood and silver nitrate filling the air. Sarah, wearing cotton gloves, lifted one plate after another, admiring the delicate craftsmanship, the perfectly staged Victorian postures, the ghostly sharpness unique to early photography. And then she found it, a large family portrait, dated May 17, 1902. The label beneath it read, "The Hamilton Family, Summer Portrait, Chestnut Hill Estate." 3 figures posed elegantly. Charles Hamilton, patriarch and founder of the Boston Merchants Bank. His wife Eleanor adorned in pearls and lace, and their only daughter, Lillian Hamilton, seated between them, dressed in flowing white silk. Her posture was flawless, her face serene, the image of grace and privilege. But when Sarah looked closer through her magnifying lens, her expression changed. Lillian's left hand, resting on her lap, didn't look right. The fingers were stiff, too elongated, the color wrong. Victorian photographs often showed slight blurring due to movement, but this hand, it was motionless, rigid, lifeless. She adjusted the light, thinking it was a reflection. But the more she examined it, the more the horror grew. The skin had a faint gray undertone, unlike the rest of her body. The fingernails appeared darker, almost black. And beneath the fabric, near the wrist, was something worse, a seam, faint but visible, running like a stitch across the flesh. Sarah stepped back, heart pounding. She knew what post-mortem photographs looked like. She'd studied them in depth. Victorian families often posed with their deceased loved ones, holding them upright or painting their eyes open to appear alive. But this was different. Lillian was very much alive in the photograph, smiling naturally, her eyes filled with light. Yet that hand belonged to someone else. Could it have been a printing error, a trick of early photographic layering? Sarah decided to check the negative, the glass plate that held the original exposure. As she placed it under magnification, the realization hit her. The hand wasn't part of Lillian's body at all. It overlapped, slightly off the joint, almost as if it had been placed there after death. And in the reflection of the glass frame, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of another person. A blurred face near Lillian's shoulder, a face that didn't belong to anyone in the Hamilton family records. Sarah froze. The air in the room suddenly felt colder. She turned the photo under the light again. The reflection was gone, but the unease remained. What had started as a simple authentication job was turning into something far stranger and darker. There were no records of servants or assistants present on the day the portrait was taken, and yet someone or something had left their mark in that image. Dr. Sarah Chen didn't know it yet, but the Hamilton family portrait would soon become one of the most disturbing pieces of visual evidence in American history, not because of what it showed, but because of what it tried to hide. A dead hand, a vanished photographer, and a family whose legacy was about to unravel, one reflection at a time. The inscription at the bottom of the photograph read, in delicate cursive ink, "The Ashford Family, Beacon Hill, 1902. A perfectly ordinary caption for what appeared to be an equally ordinary Victorian family portrait. In the sepia tones of time stood William Ashford, one of Boston's most influential bankers. His wife, Catherine, draped in lace and modest pearls, and their only daughter, Eleanor, just 19, newly engaged to Charles Morrison Jr., heir to one of New England's grandest railroad fortunes. It was the image of everything Boston's high society valued: wealth, refinement, and respectability captured in perfect stillness. The family stood before an ornate velvet curtain, the furniture carved with intricate detail, the lighting soft and dignified, a picture of stability in a world soon to change. But when Dr. Sarah Chen leaned closer, adjusting the magnifying lens on her workstation, that illusion began to fracture. It started with something small, a faint inconsistency in the texture. Eleanor's left hand, resting gracefully on her white silk gown, looked wrong. It was too pale, chalk white with an unnatural stillness that made it seem less like skin and more like porcelain. The shadows that framed her fingers didn't align with the light that illuminated the rest of her body. Sarah blinked, adjusted the microscope's focus, and tried again. The image didn't waver. The hand looked almost painted, smooth, cold, lifeless. She began comparing every part of the photograph, each limb, each glimmer of light. The reflection on William's cufflinks, the lace around Catherine's collar, the silk folds of Eleanor's gown. All consistent, perfect. Every shadow, every highlight aligned as it should, except that hand. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Her years of study had taught her to recognize degradation, the fading of emulsion, exposure damage, silvering. She'd seen countless prints where time had warped colors or distorted details. But this wasn't decay. It was deliberate. The texture of the hand wasn't photographic at all. It was inserted, almost as though someone had retouched it using primitive chemical manipulation. But in 1902, no such editing process existed that could seamlessly alter a plate without leaving chemical residue or irregularities on the surface. And yet here it was, in one hand that didn't belong. Sarah's analytical mind raced. Could it have been an exposure error? A double print, perhaps the hand of another person overlapping during development? No, the precision was too clean, too calculated. Every other aspect of the photograph's chemistry was perfect. Even the direction of the light was right, except around the hand. The shadows there bent unnaturally, almost recoiling from it. She looked again at Eleanor's face, youthful, serene, almost glowing. But something about her smile seemed strained now, forced. The more Sarah stared, the more it looked less like joy and more like endurance. She adjusted the magnification once more, tracing the faint seam at the wrist. So faint, it could have easily gone unnoticed for a century. But under her trained eye, it was unmistakable. A subtle discontinuity, like the line where two photographs might have been joined. Her gloved fingers trembled slightly. "Impossible," she whispered under her breath. Victorian families had a fascination with death photography, posing the recently deceased to look alive, creating one last image of togetherness. But this photograph wasn't that. The parents were alive, healthy. Eleanor's posture was natural, vibrant. So whose hand was it? Sarah leaned back, the chill of the sterile examination room suddenly pressing in. For decades, she had authenticated photographs of presidents, inventors, soldiers, pieces of history frozen in emulsion. But never had she seen something that defied both logic and science so completely. It wasn't just an oddity, it was a message. Someone, either the photographer or the family, had gone to great lengths to hide something inside that portrait. To the naked eye, it was the perfect Victorian tableau. But beneath that illusion, something sinister had been preserved. And as Sarah turned off her magnifier, her reflection in the glass caught the light. For just a second, she thought she saw another faint outline beside Eleanor's shoulder. Another figure, unrecorded, watching. Sarah blinked. It was gone. But the unease wasn't. At that moment, she realized the photograph wasn't merely an artifact. It was a warning, a whisper from 1902 begging to be heard. And whatever truth it held, someone long ago had tried very hard to bury it. No recorded illness by that name, no local legend, nothing at all. But buried deep in a private letter from Catherine Ashford to a family physician, dated just days before Eleanor's death, she found the final piece of the puzzle. The stiffness worsens by dusk. Her hand feels neither warm nor cold, but like stone beneath her skin. The doctor says it's nothing, but when I hold her hand, it feels like she's already gone. Sarah's breath trembled. This wasn't a disease. This was something no doctor of that time, or this one, could explain. Whatever had taken Eleanor's life hadn't started with sickness. It had started the moment her hand stopped belonging to the living. As the lab lights flickered, Sarah looked once more at the photograph, the family smiling, elegant, composed. And there, in the midst of them all, that single dead hand resting calmly on her silk dress. She whispered to herself, she wasn't posing stiffly. Her voice broke into silence. She was trying not to move. And in that instant she realized whatever had turned her hand to marble had already begun. Long before the camera ever clicked. Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit office, the faint hum of the microfilm reader echoing against the silence. Every page she turned peeled back another layer of the Ashfords' carefully constructed illusion. Boston's high society had always admired them, the family that defined wealth, propriety, and influence. But now, as she read through brittle hospital records, that image began to decay like old paper. William Ashford, the patriarch, wasn't just any banker. He was the man whose name carried weight in every financial corridor, from Beacon Hill to Wall Street. His wealth came from investments, rail shares, and, more than anything, reputation. His wife, Catherine Morrison Ashford, descended from the Morrison Railroad dynasty, a family that had laid half the tracks stretching across New England. Their marriage had united power and prestige, and now their only daughter, Eleanor, was engaged to Charles Morrison Jr., heir to the Morrison fortune. To the world it was a love story. To the Ashfords it was an empire built on appearances. But the deeper Sarah dug, the clearer it became that something was deeply wrong behind those marble columns and silk curtains. Hospital documents from Massachusetts General Hospital dated March 1902 stopped her breath. The patient's name, Eleanor Ashford. Her admission reason, neurological instability, episodic paralysis. The attending physician was Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, one of the most respected neurologists of his time. His notes, written in precise cursive, described symptoms that sounded almost supernatural. Patient exhibits periods of cataleptic rigidity, limbs frozen, unresponsive. Loss of sensation localized in the left arm and hand, skin temperature significantly reduced. Extremities display pallor, consistent with reduced circulation. Sarah whispered the words aloud. Cataleptic rigidity. In that era, few understood the condition. Victims could appear dead, heart rate faint, breathing shallow, skin cold as marble, while still being fully conscious inside. Trapped. But the most disturbing line wasn't medical. It was human. Patient discharged against medical advice. The family insists on continuing social obligations. Sarah leaned back in disbelief. The Ashfords had pulled Eleanor out of treatment to preserve their social calendar. There was a charity ball that spring, the portrait session scheduled weeks later, and an engagement announcement to uphold. Eleanor wasn't just sick, she was being displayed. Dr. Whitfield's follow-up report, dated May 1902, suggested he tried to warn them again. Condition worsening. Stiffness in the left arm is nearly permanent. The patient expresses fatigue and fear, recommends rest and limited exposure to stress or public events. There was no response from the Ashfords in the file. No record of follow-up care, just silence. Sarah could almost imagine it. The glittering halls of Beacon Hill filled with champagne and gossip, while Eleanor, pale and fragile, smiled through pain for the camera's flash. Her left hand, that same hand in the photograph, is already lifeless, already gone cold. The deeper Sarah went, the uglier the truth became. She discovered private letters between Catherine and the Morrison family discussing Eleanor's episodes. Catherine's words were chillingly detached. The doctor exaggerates. The girl must simply rest. We cannot delay the engagement further. Public doubt would be disastrous. Sarah's stomach turned. The family's concern wasn't for their daughter's suffering. It was for their reputation. Eleanor had become a symbol, a living portrait of perfection, until her body betrayed that image. Now the pale hand in the photograph made sense. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't manipulation. It was the physical evidence of a disease ignored and a daughter's sacrifice to vanity. But one final discovery changed everything. A small note, tucked behind Eleanor's medical record, signed in faint ink by a nurse named Clara Jennings. Patient's condition unstable. Morning of May 7, unresponsive. The family refused a post-mortem examination. Arrangements handled privately. May 7, 1902. One day after the portrait was taken, Sarah's pulse quickened. That meant the photograph might not have just captured Eleanor's illness. It may have captured her final moments. The realization made her skin crawl. The Ashford portrait, proudly hung for years in the halls of Beacon Hill, wasn't merely a family keepsake. It was a death record disguised as art. Sarah closed her notebook, her reflection flickering on the dark screen of the scanner. She finally understood why the photograph felt so cold, why that hand looked so lifeless. Because at that moment it was. And as she stared at Eleanor's frozen face, she felt a chill trace her own fingers. Sometimes the past doesn't just haunt, it demands to be seen. The archives at Massachusetts General were cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Dust floated in narrow beams of fluorescent light as Dr. Sarah Chen carefully unrolled a bundle of aged, brittle correspondence tied with fading blue ribbon. Each envelope bore the delicate handwriting of Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, the same neurologist who had treated Eleanor Ashford in 1902. His ink had browned with time, his pen strokes steady but burdened, as though he knew what he was witnessing would never be understood in his lifetime. Sarah leaned closer, reading by the glow of her desk lamp. April 10th, 1902. Patient exhibits recurring stiffness localized in the left extremity. No convulsions, no fever. Muscular rigidity remains prolonged, inexplicable. The heart and lungs are normal. No visible decomposition. I'm at a loss. Another letter followed, dated May 2nd, only days before the photograph session. She complains of numbness and cold in her left hand. Her fingers are drawn inward, immovable. She cannot flex or release them without pain. Her expression betrays both confusion and fear, as though she senses her body no longer obeys her. Dr. Whitfield's tone grew increasingly desperate with each line. He mentioned consulting with 2 surgeons, both of whom dismissed Eleanor's symptoms as feminine hysteria, a tragically common diagnosis at the time. But Whitfield refused to accept that explanation. His words, written in the careful precision of a man defying ignorance, were hauntingly prophetic. I do not believe this is hysteria. I believe it to be a disorder of the nervous system itself, a misfiring of muscle control, perhaps localized to the hand and arm. The stiffness resembles the rigidity seen in cadavers, but with no death. The girl lives, yet part of her seems not to. Sarah's eyes froze on that last sentence. The girl lives, yet part of her seems not to. It was an observation decades ahead of its time. The earliest description of what modern medicine now calls focal dystonia, a rare neurological disorder that distorts and freezes muscle groups without warning. Musicians, artists, and surgeons sometimes suffer from it, their hands seizing in mid-motion, refusing to obey. But in the early 1900s, such conditions were unexplored, misunderstood, and often dismissed as madness. Sarah began cross-referencing Whitfield's descriptions with modern neurology databases. Everything matched perfectly. Localized rigidity, discoloration from poor circulation, pain, and emotional distress. But what struck her most was the photograph itself. In the Ashford portrait, Eleanor's hand wasn't simply posed unnaturally. It was locked that way. The stiffness wasn't artistic. It was physiological. Blood had stopped flowing to the limb, leaving her skin ghost white and smooth, not from paint or trick lighting, but from oxygen deprivation. It was the visible mark of living petrification. Sarah zoomed in again on the high-resolution scan of the photograph. The detail was chilling. You could see the faint contrast between the healthy flush of her right hand and the ghastly pallor of her left. Even the subtle contour of the veins was missing, replaced by an eerie stillness. There was no camera flaw, no retouching, no spectral illusion. It was disease, captured in real time, the exact moment when Eleanor's body betrayed her. Dr. Whitfield's final note, written 2 days before her death, was brief and filled with helpless frustration. Patient's condition worsening. Hand entirely rigid, pain unrelieved. I fear the paralysis may spread. Family dismissive of prognosis. I can only hope she finds rest soon. Sarah closed the letter gently, her gloved fingers trembling. For years, historians and ghost enthusiasts had speculated that the Ashford photograph was cursed, that the spectral white hand was evidence of something paranormal, a haunting presence from beyond. But now she knows the truth. The horror wasn't supernatural, it was human. The real tragedy lay in the silence of that hand, a hand that told the story no one wanted to hear. A daughter suffering, a doctor ignored, a family blinded by pride. And through the unblinking eye of James Harrison's camera, that single fraction of a second had frozen her suffering forever, turning pain into permanence. Sarah felt a strange reverence, as though she was standing at the intersection of medicine and memory. Eleanor's illness, misdiagnosed and misunderstood, had become legend, until now. More than a century later, Whitfield's letters had given her voice back. She whispered softly to the faded ink, "You weren't crazy, Eleanor. You were dying and no one listened." As the realization sank in, the haunting aura of the photograph transformed. What once seemed eerie now felt heartbreakingly intimate, a glimpse into a moment of private agony masked by social grace. Sarah uploaded her findings to the Historical Preservation Archive, marking the file. Case 1902 Ashford, neurological rigidity consistent with focal dystonia. For the first time in over 100 years, the truth was recorded. The Ashford portrait wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted. It was a cry for help, frozen in silver and light. The deeper Dr. Sarah Chen went, the more the elegant mask of Boston's Ashford dynasty began to crumble. Their name, once whispered with admiration in Beacon Hill drawing rooms and marble-columned banks, now lingered like an echo of sorrow. The last traces of Eleanor Ashford's life existed not in portraits or family ledgers, but in hospital margins, written in ink that had long since bled into paper. She discovered the records buried deep in the Massachusetts Historical Medical Archives, a box labeled simply Ashford E.M. 1903-1905. Inside were the routine progress notes of nurses from Massachusetts General Hospital, each entry colder than the last. January 12, 1903, patient unable to move left arm, breathing shallow during sleep, complains of numbness and fatigue. June 5, 1904, patient's condition worsening, the voice trembles, eyes alert but expression vacant. Family visits are infrequent. October 27, 1905, circulation poor, patient unable to speak. Father requested she be dressed daily for photographs at bedside. Sarah stopped reading. That line alone felt like a punch to the chest. Even as Eleanor's lungs weakened, even as she could barely lift her head, her family's obsession with appearances persisted. To them, beauty and status mattered more than reality, even more than mercy. Whitfield's earlier fears had been correct. The disease, what modern doctors would classify as progressive dystonia, had spread beyond her limbs. By early autumn of 1905, Eleanor's breathing muscles had begun to seize. Each inhale was a battle, each exhale a whisper of defeat. The final entry came on November 18, 1905. The nurse's handwriting wavered, uneven, as if she herself struggled to steady her hand. Patient passed quietly at dawn. Family not present. My body is pale, cool, no signs of struggle. Sheet drawn. That was all. No flowers, no morning notes. Just a clinical line. An end to a life that had once glowed under chandeliers and silks. Dr. Chen exhaled slowly, tears threatening as she imagined Eleanor's final moments. Alone, forgotten. A fragile girl trapped between wealth and illness, duty and silence. When Sarah traced what happened next, the records grew eerily thin. Within 6 months of Eleanor's death, the Ashford mansion on Beacon Street was sold. By 1907, the family name had quietly disappeared from Boston's social registries. William Ashford resigned from the board of the New England Bankers Association and moved to London. His wife, Catherine, withdrew completely, vanishing from every public record after 1910. The once glorious Ashford lineage erased by its own shame. And yet one relic remained, the portrait. Sarah visited the archive again, standing before the massive print under controlled museum light. For the first time, she didn't see wealth or status. She saw evidence. Every inch of the silver gelatin plate seemed alive with meaning. The chandelier above the family shimmered faintly, the soft lace on Catherine's gown still visible through time. But Sarah's eyes drifted inevitably to the left, to that hand. Eleanor's left hand. Now that Sarah knew the truth, it no longer looked supernatural. It looked human, heartbreakingly human. The pale stillness, the unnatural smoothness, the subtle separation between the folds of her gown, all signs of a body at war with itself. It was no longer the hand of a ghost. It was the hand of a girl fighting to appear normal. And in that moment, Sarah understood. The portrait wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted. Pain was preserved pain. The Ashfords hadn't buried their daughter's illness. They'd immortalized it in the one medium that could never decay: silver. For over a century, people had admired the photograph for its composition, the balance, the symmetry, the serenity. But no one had ever looked closely enough to see what was staring back. Beneath the luxury, beneath the perfection, was a silent confession. The photo was more than art. It was testimony. Every time the camera's lens glinted, it had captured the truth that society refused to acknowledge. The cost of vanity, the cruelty of denial, and the fragility of one young woman's fading body. Sarah felt the air shift around her as she packed her notes. The story wasn't about ghosts or superstition. It was about science and silence, about how one image could bridge centuries, carrying forward the agony of a girl who couldn't speak for herself. The Ashford portrait had been passed through hands, auctions, and museums, always admired for its beauty, never understood for its meaning. Until now, standing there in the stillness of the archive, Sarah whispered the words that had haunted her ever since she found that photo. "You weren't haunting anyone, Eleanor. You were just waiting to be seen." The light flickered across the glass one last time, and for a fleeting instant, the pale hand seemed almost to move, as if finally it had been acknowledged. Because some truths don't fade with time. They wait, locked in photographs, sealed in silver. And when the right eyes finally look close enough, they speak. Today, more than a century after it was taken, the Ashford family portrait no longer hangs in a parlor or private gallery. It rests inside the temperature-controlled archives of Harvard Medical School's historical collection, behind protective glass, under soft, steady light. Visitors who come across it don't whisper about ghosts anymore. They speak about medicine, about silence, about the cruel beauty of how truth hides in plain sight. The photograph is mounted beside a plaque that reads simply, "The Ashford Family, Beacon Hill, 1902, donated anonymously, 2019. To most, it looks like any other relic of Boston's gilded past. The velvet drapery, the posture of wealth, the perfect stillness of the era. But if you step closer, if you truly look, your gaze will eventually find it. The left hand of Eleanor Ashford, that single pale hand that once froze a historian in disbelief, now sits as one of the most studied examples in both medical and photographic history. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the neurologist who collaborated with Dr. Sarah Chen to verify Eleanor's diagnosis, stands beside the display during guided lectures. Her voice, calm and reflective, often fills the otherwise silent exhibition hall. "It's not a ghost story," she tells her students. "It's a medical one. But in its own way, it's just as haunting." She explains how cataleptic rigidity, a symptom of early dystonia, could have caused the eerie stillness, and how the lack of oxygen in the extremities drained the color from the skin, turning it pale as marble. It's a textbook explanation, but one that never feels clinical. When she speaks, there's reverence in her tone, as though she's not describing a condition, but a confession. Each year, hundreds of medical students, historians, and art scholars visit the photograph. They analyze its lighting. They examine its silver emulsion under microscopes. They note how, even after 120 years, the chemical composition remains stable. The shadows sharp, the details immaculate. But despite all their tools, none can fully explain the emotional gravity of the image. It's not just the science that draws them in, it's the stillness. Because deep within that stillness lies a kind of defiance. The Ashford family portrait stands as a moment where vanity, mortality, and discovery collided. A wealthy family's obsession with perfection gave way to something greater, unintentional immortality. In trying to preserve their image, they preserved their truth, the quiet suffering of their daughter, the pressure of societal masks, and the delicate boundary between beauty and decay. Dr. Chen once wrote in her field notes, "No one set out to create a masterpiece. They created a warning, a reminder that what we try to hide eventually becomes what defines us." When the story first went public in late 2024, after Sarah published her findings in the Journal of Historical Medicine, the world responded with fascination. Social media called it the photograph that breathed. Articles appeared in Smithsonian, The Atlantic, and even National Geographic, describing the haunting beauty of the image. How a young woman's frozen hand could humanize a century-old disease. But beyond the fascination and headlines, something deeper changed. Donations poured in for research into rare neurological disorders, some made anonymously, others signed simply, "For Eleanor." At Harvard, the portrait has since become part of a permanent exhibit titled Anatomy of Stillness. It sits between 19th century anatomical sketches and early X-ray plates, not as a curiosity, but as a bridge between art and medicine. When visitors leave, they often look back at the photograph one last time. Many say they feel an odd sensation, not fear but empathy. A realization that what they're witnessing isn't a ghost caught on camera, but a moment of unbearable humanity preserved in light and silver. The Ashford family's pursuit of perfection ended in tragedy, but their portrait endures as a rare and unintentional act of truth-telling. What began as a symbol of wealth became a monument to fragility. What once was seen as supernatural is now understood as profoundly human. Dr. Rebecca Chen summed it up in her final lecture before retiring. "Every photograph freezes time, but this one captured the very thing time itself couldn't erase, the instant a life began to fade." And so, under the hum of preservation lamps and the watchful eyes of students, Eleanor Ashford continues to rest. Still, serene, eternal. Not as a ghost, not as a mystery, but as a reminder that sometimes the most haunting stories in history are the ones that actually happened. Some mysteries don't scream for attention. They whisper through time. They hide in plain sight, buried under dust, silence, and the fear of being forgotten. The Ashford family portrait was never about ghosts. It was about truth. A truth wrapped in lace, sealed in grief, and framed in silver. It waited more than a century for someone to look closely enough to see not a haunting but a heartbreak. And maybe that's the real horror, not the dead coming back, but the living pretending everything's fine while someone they love quietly fades away. So if you believe history still keeps secrets like this, subscribe, because here we uncover what the past tried to bury. Because sometimes the dead don't haunt us with ghosts. They haunt us with photographs,